The MIT Sloan School of Management has always been a different kind of business school from the rest.
At MIT, we talk about addressing the world's biggest challenges, and that right there says it all for impact.
The Sloan central purpose is organizations are the path by which great ideas have an impact in the world.
We are in the business of helping people become better leaders, principled, innovative leaders who improve the world.
I have brilliant colleagues, but also colleagues who, at the core, are working to improve the world and to build something for real.
So every person and every colleague that I have at MIT, I think our business is to try to make the world a much better place.
Today's world, you see a tremendous amount of alienation, of class separation. The one thing everybody agrees on is entrepreneurship is a great thing.
Bill Aulet, in many ways, is the example, from central casting of the entrepreneur turned catalyst. He likes creating the conditions so that others can learn. And he has been an extraordinarily successful leader of the Martin Trust Center.
It's my firm belief that studying sustainability is perfectly suited for a school of management.
For years, John has been basically driving home this idea of how it's all a systems and we have to view the world through a systems lens. Here's someone who is absolutely at the top of his game as a scholar, and yet is completely committed to translating that scholarship into change in the real world.
What I'm really interested and excited by is to figure out how to use insights from finance and financial tools to improve the world.
Antoinette has this knack of finding problems and data that lead to pay dirt, that lead to something that has much broader implications. And when she digs into a problem, she often goes 1 or 2 layers deeper than other people have, and she finds out things that other people have missed.
Taking care of complex systems is almost like taking care of the human. You need to really understand the underlying mechanism of the current problem in order to really fix it.
We worked with a number of groups, failed multiple times, and then came across Retsev and his team. This work has had an enormous impact on the lives of thousands of patients. Partnering with Retsev and folks at Sloan has been so enormously helpful to us. Not only understanding the science of operations management, but actually making it happen in an organization that is made up of people.
At Sloan, we often like to say a better world is our business. That has a lot of implications, and I think this is a very profound statement.
It's a great idea that's turned into a great action that makes the world a better place.
The questions that are incredibly ambitious, that are incredibly impactful to humankind.
How we engage with that outside world, business leaders, policymakers in every kind of organization.
Using capitalism, which is the most powerful force the world's ever seen, to be able to take and make the world a better place.
And so if we can contribute to that, if we can have impact with our ideas, that's the ultimate reward.
My name is Dave Schmidtlein, and I'm Dean of MIT's Sloan School of Management. Thank you for participating in this gathering. The video that you just saw offered a glimpse of the stories that unfold at MIT Sloan every day. They showed you some of the leaders in our community working on complex, incredibly important problems. They also showed you leaders from the wider world who've had the opportunity to work with our faculty and to see the amazing impact, in fact, impact that amazed them. We're in the business of creating principled, innovative leaders who improve the world. We honestly are, through our faculty, also through our staff, students, and through our alumni. And as a community of faculty, staff, students, and alumni, we work on incredibly complex problems. We bring brilliant minds to create solutions that make a difference and that will last. At MIT Sloan, ideas are honestly made to matter. A better world is our business. In this time of change and challenge and uncertainty, that perspective from a school of management is extraordinarily important, I want to suggest to you. We know that the ways that funding operates for basic science and even for drug discovery are going to have to change. The private sector is going to play a larger role. How? We know that outmoded systems of transportation, healthcare, need to be reinvented, and the private sector and brilliant minds are going to have to take the lead. We know from the headlines of the recent weeks and months that the private sector is going to have to lead in promoting sustainable business practices and a healthy planet, and MIT Sloan has an important role to play. We know that financial systems need to become more efficient and more resilient. The world needs more and better modern finance, not less modern finance. And we know that new phrases of the last 10 years, like cybersecurity and digital resilience, are going to be an important, increasingly important part of what we need. We need all of this and more. It is coming, and MIT Sloan is in the middle of it, energetic and effective. Now, the video that you saw featured faculty, and faculty do play an important role, and we'll come back to talk more about them. But it's not only faculty that are making a difference with respect to these kinds of issues. It's also people like you. So when we think about complex challenges and people doing some of the important work, I think about someone like Frederick Karist. Some of you know Frederick. Just 8 years ago, he was a young entrepreneurship student at MIT Sloan. 2 weeks ago in New York City, his company went public on NASDAQ, valued at over $1 billion. But that's not the important part to me. The important part, okay, that's important too. Someday. It's important to my successor. But what's important about it is the contribution that that company is making to cybersecurity and digital resilience. We're proud of Ben Golub. Ben's work as Chief Risk Officer for BlackRock is not only making a positive difference for that company, but the perspectives they're developing on digital resilience make a difference that goes far beyond. And when we look at the headlines of the last few weeks coming out of Venezuela, we think of our MIT Sloan alumnus, Lorenzo Mendoza. So Lorenzo's been called a national hero and the last protector of civil society in that country. He is an iconic and successful business person. He's also the bravest person I know. And when you ask him why he stands up and stands out and speaks out, he says, someone has to do it. And who else but someone from MIT? When you get to know our MIT Sloan alumni, one of the things that you hear over and over is the way that MIT changed them. It didn't only change them by teaching them some math and science and some analytical tools and giving them a professional opportunity, although it did that. It isn't just a source of a network of really nice, really smart, really good people, although it is that too. But it's a place that they will tell you changed how they think, it changed what they do, and it's changed who they are. The becoming a part of you is something that I hear over and over from our alumni. Now, another thing besides the idea of MIT that you hear from our alums is how individual faculty, like some of the ones we saw in the video, made an incredibly important difference to them. It didn't just come from nowhere. It came from amazing faculty who did amazing things, and the students got to see it. I can't bring a lot of faculty on the road with me, but I can tell you their stories. One person in particular whose story I'd like to share with you is a Professor Roberto Rigobon. So Roberto's an amazing faculty member. He's someone who makes me so proud. His work has reinvented the way that economic conditions are understood in the world for products, for markets, and for whole countries. The work goes under the title The Billion Prices Project. And what that work does is every day, for millions of products in thousands of categories in 100 countries.
David, can I continue? Can I just take over, please? I don't know how you can tell the story about the Billion Prices Project without a Latino accent. So let me start. Thank you so much. What I would like to do is use a little bit of time to tell you a bit about the story, about the Billion Prices, but I would like to start telling the story about my shoulder. I don't know if you saw in the video. Yes, I fractured my shoulder. And the way this happens, when you are 20, 30-year-old individual, you usually injure your shoulder, you know, in a motorcycle accident, skydiving, stuff like that. When you're like 40 years old, it's usually skiing or something like that. When you're older than 50, like myself, you injure your shoulder reaching for the, you know, remote control, okay? This is super pathetic, I know. And that leads me to my research. No, actually, my research is to try to think about how we can measure life differently. I think that we measure life, every aspect of life, very badly. And in my personal case, the brain has not received the memo that my body is a 50-year-old person. So my brain is mismeasuring my ability. And I actually think that we mismeasure every aspect of life. When do we know a lake is being polluted? Usually when we lose it. When do we know that a society is under duress or unrest? Usually when people are in the streets, like what is happening in Venezuela. When do we know that our political systems are affected or broken? Well, usually when we elect candidates that we would like to resample. No? Actually, any sample will do it anyway. How do you know that your relationships are in bad shape? Usually when they're broken. When do we diagnose sadness? Usually when it gets to depression. We measure every aspect of life very badly. And I started to think about this question about measurement about 16 years ago. And it was hard to move away. The day you realize that we can make a difference about measuring life differently, it is hard to think about anything else. So I got the help of a student, an MBA Sloan. I don't know how many of you actually know Alberto Cavallo. Can you yell a little bit? Who knows Alberto? Excellent. So Alberto came to my office at the time when I was trying to think about how to measure inflation rates differently. And we started the Billion Prices Project. This is a project that was very strange to finance. It's a project on a very non-sexy topic, okay? So, I mean, measuring inflation rate is something that we have been doing for hundreds of years. So why on earth are you interested in doing exactly the same? Now, my wife is in the audience, by the way. So anyone that wants to corroborate all the stories about my family, she's actually in the audience. That's actually not her, but that's her sister. So, moving on, my wife says that I am genetically designed to do very non-sexy projects, okay? You can ask her if you want, but I actually think that she's correct. Now, Alberto is good looking, so this just tells you how ugly looking I am, because on average, we're doing a very non-sexy topic. Also, this was a question about economics, but it was truly a computer science project. And the way the world finances research is mostly in silos. You have the money that goes from computer science is devoted to projects that are supposed to answer questions of computer science. And the money that goes to economics is supposed to answer questions of economics. And the money that goes to statistics is supposed to answer questions of statistics. We were a very strange hybrid. We belonged to no place. We were a freak. we were a typical MIT project. And in fact, not only Sloan helped this project, but they embraced it completely. This project would have not existed without the help of Sloan, and by transitivity, without your commitment and support to Sloan. Today, by the way, we started with 4 countries. We started in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Colombia, only getting data from one supermarket in each of these countries, in a laptop, in Alberto's laptop. Then we started to learn how to do this better, so we needed more computing power, so we moved it to my server in my office. Then we needed more computing power, so I purchased 3 more servers and I put them in my office. Then the fire department came and says that was a fire hazard. Actually, the average temperature in my office was 85, I'm telling you. So it doesn't matter the time of the year, people were just like in a sauna there, okay? So after that, we moved to the basement of the Sloan School, and that was not enough, and we started buying even more servers, and there was a moment in time that we owned, and between Alberto and myself, we owned 3/4 of the computing power of the Sloan School, at which time, when people were sending an email, they had to ask for permission, which was very good, because whenever someone was saying something bad about me, that email got lost, apparently. But, and then the dean said, please get out. and today, now, we do this all in the cloud. But today, we download and we track more than 1 billion prices, 1 billion items every single day. The best statistical offices in the world, the developed nations, they track about 80,000 to 60,000 per month. We compute daily inflation rates, not of one country. We compute daily inflation rates for more than 20 countries. We track inflation rates for more than 100 countries in different items, different sectors, subsectors. And we do this every single day. I am very happy to report that last week, 8 statistical offices on Earth changed their procedures. They're going to compute the inflation rate of several subsectors like hotels, air travel, and TVs, using the exact same procedures that Alberto and I have designed 10 or 12 years ago. We provide the data to the central bankers when the central bankers don't have data because someone in Congress decided to cut the budget in the United States. That tends to happen. By the way, probably it's going to happen this summer again. Well, we provide the data to them. So the impact of this project has been not only important on the financial sector, but has been actually important on a statistical office, which has been more or less the goal that Alberto and I have wanted to have. More than 83 people have worked on that project, 83 people during the years. By the way, they do all the work, okay? So I mean, they download all the data, they clean the data, they construct the indexes, and I take care of the most difficult part of the project, which is they take 100% of the credit, all the money, dealing with all the celebrities. I mean, I remember when Taylor Swift called me, and she says that Roberto, I want to write a song about you. And I said, no, Taylor, you only write songs about your broken relationships, and we have none. Anyway, so she said, no, but I want to write a song about you. I said, what are you doing now? And I was just actually nailing something in the wall. My wife always makes me work in carpentry at home. So I was just nailing, and she says, Roberto, but I want to write a song. And I said, players will play. And haters will always hate. But you should shake it off. And then I just hit my thumb and I said, woo. And you understand the pressure. That was a private conversation. I have to deal with that. So, but this is not the end of the story. Actually, we are obsessed with measurement, and what I want to do is to give you a little bit of the framework that I have in mind. Inflation rate has been very successful, what we have done, but I am not satisfied, not entirely. The way I think about it is I have a word that organizes my thinking about sustainability and how we can make a better society, how can we make a better world. And that word is called promise. And this promise, the P stands for personal, R for relationships, O for organizations, M for markets and the economy, I for institutions, S for the society and politics, and E for the ecosystem and the environment. If we want to find and we want to build, and we have a vision of a better world. It better be consistent among all these dimensions. A country or a community where the environment is great, where the companies are working great, where the market economy is working perfectly, where institutions are great, the politics, democracy is great, but everybody's unhappy. That might look fine today, but that's not sustainable. No chance of being sustainable. On the contrary, a country where everybody's happy, but the economy is horrible, the political system is corrupt, doesn't work, they are destroying the environment. Well, we know Brazil is not sustainable at all. We need to find a way to make all these dimensions sustainable, and the only way we're going to do that is if we measure properly. That project today, unfortunately, in the climate in the world that we are, most politicians put zero weight on some of these dimensions. The polarization on politics is reflected on the fact that some of them will just care about 2 or 3 of these dimensions and disregard everything else. We have to find a way that our values are reflected on those decisions. And the way this is going to happen is by us actually showing and proving to them that we can construct a better vision for the future. And for that, more than ever before, we need your help. This is a much more weird project than anything else that I have done before. But I believe that the only way to actually help it is to do that. Is to actually do the investment, to put the time. You have my commitment and my complete passion that I will devote all the time that I have available, except for the 3 minutes I spend with my wife, mostly devoted to this. Let me finish by saying a couple of things. First, what makes MIT great, and absolutely a fantastic place, to me, is the fact that I receive a shock of humbleness every single day I enter that building. First, I realize how extraordinarily smart my colleagues are. I always feel, in some sense, inadequate. Like, how on earth I was accepted to this institution when these individuals are doing things that are so important, that are so smart, and actually so well motivated about, changing and improving the world. So that's humbling, actually. Second, I am in contact with the staff, and I'm amazed about their pursuit of excellence in every single aspect that they do in their lives, every single aspect. I mean, these meetings and all of the reunions, but every single aspect, there's a pursuit of excellence that is quite unique. And then I meet some of you. I mean, half of the MBAs and almost all the Sloan Fellows and the EMBAs. And I am mesmerized by how smart you are, how committed you are, how incredibly hardworking you are, how you will not trade off your principles and your moral aspects. It is truly humbling in that aspect. And I want to thank you because part of my research and part of who I am comes from you. I remember the first time I taught a class at Sloan School. I had about 80 people in the classroom, and I received one email after the first classroom of 6 pages, saying how lousy my class was. And he said, this is unacceptable. By the way, on the second class, there were only 40 people. I gave a class, and I didn't need the email to know that my second class was just a complete failure. And by the third class, there were only 20 students on that elective. And I remember I said, I think I have something to contribute. Can you teach me how to teach you? And since that day, I actually teach MBAs. So it was actually, I keep that email because the amount of rage that I was able to instill in one person to write 6 pages in about 30 seconds, it was unique, okay? One thing that I want to do is to show you a video and introduce some of my colleagues. I want to remind you of something very, very, very important, is that I am the one here, which they send a video, okay? So I just want to let you know who really loves you, okay? You understand, okay? I mean, no pressure whatsoever. But when you go back to MIT to the reunion and you bring one bottle of wine for the faculty that doesn't love you, Remember to bring 2 bottles of wine for the faculty that really loves you. Is that clear? I mean, Mia, yes, I don't know. Rod Garcia is here. Rod, did you pick that? Okay, good. Okay, so part of this is, so you know. But what I want to do is to leave you with some of the videos of my colleagues, great colleagues that we have at MIT. This is just a small sample of what we do at the Sloan School. And thank you so much for your time and your attention. Thank you.
I grew up in a complex system in the Israeli military. I spent there almost 12 years, and when I started my academic career, I tried to kind of study similar systems. And it's very hard to think about systems that are more complex than healthcare systems. It's also a very important system in terms of what it delivers at the end for the world and for individual people, including people that are close to me. So we started at some point to really try and address major patient flow disruptions that the MGH had in their perioperative care system, in moving patients that finished their surgery in the operating room into the recovery area that is typically called PACU. The first question they ask us, how many beds do we need to add to the PACU? Very quickly, we realized that the real problem is not between the operating rooms and the PACU, the recovery area, but in fact, the inability to actually move patients from the recovery area to a general floor in the hospital. The key is actually not to start and talk about the problem in terms of efficiency, but actually start from how do we improve the experience of the patient. When you try to improve the experience that the patients have, you actually also improve the efficiency of the system. Maybe unlike what people could think if they kind of don't dive into the details. You know, when I teach the students in the class about complex systems in general, but on health systems in particular, I always tell them that if you want to change something, you need to understand how it was created. You need to actually assume that there is an underlying rationale that created the current system. A rationale that is not necessarily taking its roots from purely logical aspects, but also cultural aspects, value aspects, political aspects. The Sloan School of Management and MIT are one of the few places that could integrate those perspectives in an effective way. What I like about the Sloan School of Management is you have a very high density of people that really aspire to change the world and make it a better place. We have all the elements to actually leverage the expertise to create a new way of thinking about these systems, both in the United States and across the globe, in a way that I think could actually have a global footprint.
MIT Sloan really is a place that I adore. It's never just research for research's sake or to just publish, but to achieve something or to change something in the real world. So people thought that in the crisis of 2008 that the subprime customers and the subprime segment were driving the disarray in the market. Now, when we actually looked at the data, we were really almost shocked and surprised when we saw that this is actually not what was going on. We looked at very large-scale data sets that allowed us to map the entire mortgage industry and the entire mortgage market in the US. And what we found is that the subprime market, yes, it was growing in the pre-crisis period, but most of the mortgage dollars were flowing to middle-class and upper-middle-class people. So exactly the opposite of the subprime narrative. In addition, we actually found, if we look at post-2008, where did the defaults come from? The biggest increase were in middle-class households and upper-middle-class households, not so much in the subprime. Now you can ask, how come that people didn't see this before? What did we do that others didn't do? The big difference in our work that we actually really looked at individual decision makers. It will tell you that it doesn't help the financial market if we prevent poorer people from also getting mortgages because they were not at the heart of the crisis. But if you look at the data post-2008, it has become extremely difficult for lower-income households and even younger households to buy houses and to have mortgages. while richer people still have access to mortgages. So why is it so important for me that we get this right and that we understand the real sources of the crisis? Because we really want to make policy that's evidence-guided, that's evidence-based, that's not just opinions that people have. And if we have this better understanding, we can actually help industry and policymakers to level the playing field in the right direction for people.
I consider myself an accidental academic. I was really just a business person. And as a business person, I was really a basketball player who couldn't play anymore. And I liked the whole part of business where it was merit-based, where you could really earn it. And I felt that being an entrepreneur was more merit-based than when I was working at IBM, because I could impact things more directly. So the conventional wisdom has been that entrepreneurship can't be taught, and it's just something you're born with, or it's magical. And I think that this first got cracked in 1991 when Ed Roberts wrote the first book that took entrepreneurship seriously as a field of study where no one had really done that before. The Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship first believes that entrepreneurship is a craft. It's not an art, it's not a science, but it's something that can be taught, but it needs to be taught with first principles and kind of strong mentorship as you would teach a craft. We're not focused on, is this startup going to work or not? We are trying to teach people how to fish, not catch a fish, to be able to do it over and over and over again. We start with the heart. This creates the spirit and mindset that people want to be. The second thing is, it's the head, it's the knowledge. The third one is the hands, because it's not just enough to know what to do, you have to implement it. And the last H is the home. When you walk into the Martin Trust Center for MIT Entrepreneurship, every detail has been thought through, every square foot. There's a coffee machine, and it's a really good coffee machine. And you have to understand, we are very, very cheap. But spending money on the coffee machine is one of the most important things, because it brings people together. Every detail is thought through so the students can create serendipitous collisions to work with each other. But then when they want to start to work, they can go off and they can find their nooks to work with people together. And they can do different types of work there, including building product. We have the best students in the world. And they don't take themselves too seriously, but they take their mission very, very seriously. And as this world gets to have more and more uncertainty, more and more crises and expectations, I want our students to be the ones that say, we're not going to be broken by that. So we work very hard to take whatever your original idea is to build a meaningful company. And by a meaningful company, we mean a company that has an impact on the world. So it's my firm belief that we can contribute in a major way by taking what we teach for entrepreneurship and getting it out to the masses in the world. Not just people who come here to MIT, but entrepreneurship at a massive scale. By that, I mean millions of people.
Back when I was in high school, my father brought home one of Jay Forrester's early papers on the world model. It had a huge impression on me. And I ended up then coming here specifically to study system dynamics. Climate change is happening now, and we haven't yet experienced the worst of what's going to happen if we don't dramatically cut emissions. Research shows that showing people research doesn't work. So we had to come up with a different approach. And our approach is to develop our management flight simulator into climate policy simulation. It's used by policymakers in the United States, in France, in China, in Brazil, in other countries, by the UN. And that's important, but it's not sufficient. If there had been a perfect climate agreement reached in Paris or in Marrakesh, it would have been dead on arrival when it came back to all the capitals of the world, because there simply isn't at this point enough grassroots support for the legislation and the policy changes we need to cut our emissions fast enough. So we created an interactive role-play simulation of the global climate negotiations that we call the World Climate Exercise. We immediately are able to show them what's likely to happen, and what research shows is that, in fact, people who go through this experience learn more about climate science, become much more emotionally engaged around the issue, feel a greater sense of urgency, want to learn more, and express a much greater intention to take action in the real world. Over 30,000 people have participated in the World Climate Exercise in just the last year and a half, and it's growing very rapidly. People are going to the website, everything is there for free, and they're learning how to run it entirely from those materials on their own and taking it to essentially every continent on the planet. Being a school of management, we seek to change the behavior of humans. We seek to influence the way people structure their enterprises. And that's not just an intellectual exercise. That requires touching people's emotions, reaching their hearts as well as their minds. It's really quite amazing to see. That's a great day.
We shine a light on the dark corners to look at complex problems in a whole new way.
We know that there are solutions to be uncovered. It's just a question of how much digging is needed to illuminate them.
The approach we take in our work is a kind of light switch. That is the transformation we seek in the way we approach and solve complex challenges.
There are solutions to many problems that today we can't see. But the reason we can't see them is not because they don't exist. It's only because nobody has yet pulled them into the light.
This is what we do at MIT Sloan. I want to join Roberto Rigobon in thanking Dave Schmidtlein for allowing us to break through that fourth wall to be with you all here in person today. And I want to thank all of you for being here and participating in this wonderful event. You know, this is such a special event that both Roberto and I were extraordinarily pleased to be here, but I have to admit that there was one bit of a disappointment on my part. And the disappointment is that I had to go after Roberto. Following him is never an easy act, and I don't see how anyone can compete with the Latin charm. I don't know if there's such a thing as Asian charm, but I don't think I have it. You know, Roberto's charm will get him a bottle of wine, apparently, and I don't know, Asian charm, it might get me a free flight on United Airlines now, but that's about it. So now, I'm privileged to be here to tell you a little bit about some of the things that I'm doing at Sloan, and I'll begin by asking you all to consider an investment proposition, because I know there are a number of investors, investment professionals, and entrepreneurs in the audience. So I want you to consider the following entrepreneurial alternative. I need $200 million, and I'm going to invest it over a period of 10 years, and you won't be able to get any return until then. And the probability that you'll get any return is 5%. By a show of hands, how many of you would invest? No takers? Well, you know, when I present this to my MBA students, I will get a couple of students raise their hands and ask, Professor Lowe, you know, you didn't tell us what the rate of return is. Most people don't even need to know, because with 10 years, $200 million, and a 5% probability of success, they're not interested. Well, these are the back of the envelope numbers for what it takes to develop a single anti-cancer agent. And in the unlikely event that you succeed, you will get what amounts to a $12.3 billion payday in year 10. That's about $2 billion a year for 10 years, amortized from years 11 to 20, 10% cost of capital, $12.3 billion with 5% probability, 95% with no possibility of a payout. How many of you would invest in this now? A couple of people, but not many. It's just not that compelling from an investment perspective. And as a result, we're actually challenged today in being able to develop these very important therapies, despite the fact that the science is actually an inflection point and we're on the verge of some incredible breakthroughs. Now, the situation is a little bit more complicated. It turns out that there actually is a lot of money, but mainly for late-stage drug development, phase 3 and approval. For the early stages, where a lot of the breakthroughs happen, there's actually a very, very small amount of capital today, much less so than before, so much that it's now called the Valley of Death. This is the preclinical to phase 2 areas. And it's because it's just too risky, and it's gotten riskier as scientists have made breakthroughs and learned more about how to deal with these terrible afflictions. And I learned about this Valley of Death in a very personal way several years ago when my mother was dealing with lung cancer. I was introduced to a very successful biotech company developing a number of experimental therapies, including one for this particular kind of cancer. And I was privileged to meet with the chief scientific officer, who brought along his chief financial officer, because he heard I was a finance professor, had no idea who I was. And we started off the conversation in what I thought was a rather innocent way. I asked the two of them, does your source of financing have an influence on your scientific agenda? Because I was deeply interested in that agenda, since one of the therapies was something that could have helped my mother. The chief scientific officer looked at his CFO ironically, shook his head, and turned back to me and said, influence? Our financing drives our scientific agenda. And I got to tell you that from the perspective of the son of a patient, I was absolutely outraged. Because what does stock market volatility, interest rates, and Fed policy have to do with whether you can cure cancer via angiogenesis inhibitors or by immunotherapy? Nothing. And yet it drives the scientific agenda. So I realized then and there that the biomedical industry actually has a bit of a challenge. The challenge is how to finance drug development, because it's gotten riskier and investors have left for lower hanging fruit in other fields. And it was then that I realized, finance could actually play a role, because we actually are able to re-engineer risks in all sorts of creative ways. So here's an example. Instead of investing in one of these projects, what if we invested in 150 of them all at the same time? Now, I realize that sounds like a strange thing, because first of all, you'd need 150 times 200 million or $30 billion. Where are you going to get $30 billion? Well, as an economist, I have a very simple answer. Assume we have $30 billion. And I'll come back to this. I'll come back to it. But if we had $30 billion, it turns out that the probability of at least 3 successes out of 150 shots on goal that are each statistically independent of each other is 98.18%. 98% probability of at least 3 hits out of 150 tries. And if you got at least 3 hits out of 150 tries, that means that your portfolio would be worth, in year 10, 3 times $12.3 billion, or $37 billion. Now, if you had a portfolio that is worth $37 billion in year 10 with 98% probability, it turns out that you can actually finance the vast majority of that by issuing bonds, cancer bonds. And what's the yield on those bonds? Well, you could issue up to $37 billion of cancer bonds, and at last week's single A rating, you'd be able to raise $27 billion today. Now, how do I know that the single A rating is appropriate? Well, because the default rate of single A bonds is about 2%. That's 1 minus 98.18%. And if you use all of the other tricks of the financial trade, things like credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, and derivative securities, you can do even better than that. Now you're wondering, really? Is this really a good idea? I mean, isn't this what figured prominently in the financial crisis? And I got to tell you that it was actually studying the financial crisis that got my co-authors and I thinking along these lines. The financial crisis didn't happen because these techniques didn't work. They happened because the techniques, they worked way too well. They are extremely powerful tools for raising large amounts of capital for specific purposes. So imagine if we can use these types of tools to deal with society's biggest challenges, like cancer, Alzheimer's, climate change, fusion energy. There is an incredible amount that we can do by using these kinds of tools in the proper way. Can you really do this? Well, this is exactly what my co-authors and I are working on right now. We're running simulations, collecting data, talking to experts, writing case studies, bringing together all of the various different stakeholders to study this and to see whether or not it's feasible. And the early results seem to show that actually, not only is it feasible, but the rates of return that investors can earn are actually quite attractive. And so a number of industry groups are taking some of our ideas and starting to implement them. There are a couple of pilot projects that launched last year and this year, and more to come over the course of the next few months. Now, I know that talking about rates of return in the same breath as life and death issues like cancer may seem obscene and offensive to many people. My mother ultimately died of cancer, so I get it. But if we don't talk about these kinds of things, we're not going to be able to get the funding we need in order to deal with these terrible afflictions. And that's the message that I want to leave you with, which is that finance is a means to an end. And when we forget that is when we get into trouble. Finance doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. We can do well by doing good. And with your support, your encouragement, your inspiration, and I mean that sincerely. You know, many people think that students come to Sloan because they're inspired by the faculty. But I got to let you in on a secret. The faculty, many of us, came to Sloan and are inspired by all of you. And so with all of your help, I believe that we can actually do this, and we can do it now. So I want to conclude by thanking all of you and asking Dave Schmittlein to come back up the stage to make some concluding remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. The first voice that you heard this evening on that first video was Andrew Lo. And the first thing he said is the MIT Sloan School has always been a different kind of school of business. It is a different kind. Some of that difference, sure, is in system dynamics, modern finance, the prominence of entrepreneurship, business analytics, and so on. Some of it is mind and hand, that we don't feel comfortable making a trade-off between rigor and relevance. Some of it is a community that values both smart but also inventive, open but also grounded. These are characteristics that help define us. They're ones that I hope you embrace as well. You were taught to choose important challenges, to dig in and find the facts, to apply the tools that you have that you can build to invent the future. The future is maybe a good place for us to conclude this evening. Now, you've heard a fair amount from me, and you've heard from faculty. You haven't heard from students, and I don't have any students waiting in the wings here. But I would like, at least, this time from start to finish, to tell you the story of one student's application to MIT. I happened to be this student's advisor during her first year, so I saw what she wrote on the application saying why she wanted to come. With her permission, this is what she wrote. The rooster flew across the classroom. It's the one that my grandfather brought to school with him on the first day of first grade. He brought it in hopes that this gift would have the teacher let him stay, but he would not. My grandfather's father was fighting for Korea's independence, and the families of those fighters were banned from education. Fortunately, Korea achieved its independence just a couple of years later, and my grandfather was able to go to school just a couple of years after his friends. Education meant everything to him, and he became a school teacher in that same small town. His dream for his son, my father, is that he would go to the best university in Korea. And would you just use education to make a difference? Today, my father is a doctor in Seoul. My grandfather and my father's dream for me, and mine for myself, is that I would go to the best university in the world and use that education to make a difference. Please let our dreams come true. I have a dozen of those stories. They're all different, and they're all the same. When the journalist Thomas Friedman came to MIT a few years ago to meet with our students for a couple days, one of the things that they told him stayed with him and became the headline for the story that he wrote. The thing they said is, "We are the people that we've been waiting for." You know that this evening is part of MIT's campaign. This is where you want to put up your protector shields because there might be a solicitation coming. The students that come to MIT do, I think, deserve my support and your support. The faculty who do the kind of work that you just saw, I think, deserve our support. If this little story and these faculty stories don't convince you of that, then I've failed and we've failed. About 10 years ago at the Sloan School, we increased dramatically faculty support and our support for students. And we did it in a setting where we didn't have a history of engaging with our alumni and friends the way we should. And we trusted and believed that you would come through, that you would make that increased support sustainable, and you did. As MIT launched the public phase of the campaign for a better world this year, we did that again. We have dramatically increased scholarship aid, aid for our students to travel around the world, aid for our students to be changed. And we've dramatically increased our support for the kind of large-scale faculty projects that you saw here. And we believe and we trust that you will make that sustainable. I hope that you will. I know that you care about MIT or you wouldn't be here this evening. It's a terrible thing, but caring isn't enough. I have to ask you, please, don't give more than you can, but don't give less. The school, as part of the MIT campaign, has as its statement, "A better world is our business." It can sound a little bit like maybe a slogan. I don't think it is. I don't think the people in our community believe that it is. I think if you look in the faces of the people in this community, you see that it's real.
To us,
a better world
is not a lofty vision.
It's not an improbable hope.
It's not a convenient platitude.
It's not even a charge to everyone.
Because then it's a charge to no one.
A better world is ours to make.
A better world is our business.
We know that the important problems today
are complex problems.
Complexity is our call to action.
We start with questions.
Dig in to find facts.
Build and rebuild.
Ideas made to matter.
In our solutions.
Prove that no problem is too big.
When we're working on it together.
The promise that we take with us.
Across borders, boundaries, and walls.
Is that we will stay curious.
And we will stay brave.
Driven by our conviction.
That fixing what's broken.
And inventing what's better.
Isn't just possible.
It's inevitable. We are the ones to do it.
Because impact is our bottom line.
Making a difference is in our DNA.
And though our burden of responsibility is great,
our ability to change the world
is greater.
Today and tomorrow.
A better world.
A better world.
A better world is our business.